Attention, we're going to get started. First of all, before I introduce our host for this session, I got a couple announcements that I want to make. I want to say, first of all, that I love being in this state. I know I've said that a couple times, but I want you to know something. I can spot you people, not just here, I can spot you anywhere in the country, because North Dakota folks always enter a room this way. I'm serious. In July in Phoenix. It's just habit. We've got a great session lined up for you, and it's my pleasure to introduce a friend of mine. We've been on the program together. She's one of the most well-known farm broadcasters around. She's also one of the most well-known market reporters around. She's a South Dakota girl, raised on a dairy and crop farm. I went to South Dakota State University, got a degree in dairy manufacturing and ag journalism, and then a master's in ag journalism. So please welcome somebody I'm sure you know, Michelle Rook. Thank you, dear.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Introduced Mark, so I got the pleasure of introducing him and have heard him speak many times and think he does a wonderful job, especially trying to adapt to the audience that he has every place that he goes. Orion Samuelson always told me it's easier to find a new audience than a new speech, but that's not Mark's philosophy, and so we love him for that. So good to see you again, Mark. So we want to introduce our panel here today, if they would come up to the stage. We have Jim Sutter. He is the CEO of the U.S. Soybean Export Council.
Excuse me.
Leslie McNitt, she's with the National Corn Growers Association, Director of Public Policy, Trade, and Biotech. And we also have Dr. Bill Wilson with us with North Dakota State University. He is University Distinguished Professor in the Department of Agricultural Economics. So the format that we are going to have for today will be, first of all, we'll start off with a little introduction of each of the panelists. They will be doing a little bit of an overview and an opening statement. And then because we are going to be broadcasting portions of this program on AgWeek TV, we're going to be doing a couple of different things, and you are going to be our TV audience. So we're going to have two different segments that we're going to be running on AgWeek TV, one this week, one next week, and we're going to be taking excerpts of the program and running those. And so you'll kind of see me do a little bit of an introduction as we start and a little bit of a break in between, and then we'll have like a second segment. So just kind of bear with me as we do some of the formalities that we have to do to make this a beautiful TV program. So first off, we have a wonderful round of speakers today joining us for this panel, and obviously international trade has been the hot button issue all year for us, reporting it, and you as farmers living it, obviously, especially up here in the Pacific Northwest market area here up in the Northwestern Corn Belt. China's been your dominant focus for so long, and you have built up that market and have been right in the crosshairs of the trade war. So today we're going to have a very lively and important discussion here about what's coming up, what's next, and how it's going to be impacting your future. And we're just so honored to have such a good panel of guests with us. We're going to have them start with opening statements first off, and I don't know if we should go in a certain order, but Jim, I think we'll start with you. Jim Sutter with USSEC will be starting.
Great. Thank you very much, Michelle. Good morning. My pleasure to be here with all of you. So I have the pleasure of representing the U.S. Soybean Export Council. We're an organization that was founded in 2005 by the American Soybean Association, the United Soybean Board, and we do work on behalf of U.S. soybean farmers and the U.S. soybean industry. We're a member organization. We have 100 members. Some of you were in my presentation earlier. You saw that collage slide that we have. We really do. We're very fortunate to have a very wide array of members, so when we're out talking to audiences around the world about U.S. soy, we can truly say we represent the industry. Our job is to differentiate and build a preference for U.S. soy, and to ensure we have market access for U.S. soy. The things that our growers and our industry needs in order to be able to have the freedom to export our crop around the world. Just a couple things we really talk about with regard to the U.S. soy. We talk about the U.S. soy advantage. We talk about the nutrient profile of U.S. soy, because we have a scientifically proven strong nutrient profile of U.S. soy, a little higher concentration of amino acids and energy than soy from other origins, and we have great sustainability. And all of you contribute to that sustainability with the way that you do your farming. So thanks. I look forward to the questions and the discussion. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Dr. Wilson, would you like to give us a little lay of the land as well?
Thank you. So it's good to be here. Good to see former students as always. Can't see the rest of you. I would, as many of you probably know, I do work in this topic a lot because I'm on the North Dakota Soybean Council Marketing Committee, and I channel a lot of my research in these fields and around like this. And I do work around the world, and actually just returned from Moscow yesterday. And I would just say one thing that's really important when it comes to these trade wars, et cetera, which we're going to talk about, is the way I always start my speech is the following, that the United States has got a tremendous competitive advantage in terms of supply, logistics, technology, and new technology being developed in this country. That always used to give us about 7 or 8 years advantage relative to everybody else. Now it gives us about 4 years advantage or 3 years advantage. And what the trade war does is distorts the advantage that we otherwise have. I find it so ironic when I go around the world that the biggest industry in North Dakota is storing soybeans, and everybody else is selling their brains out. Right. And that's how distorted things become. I would also say, since I started my career, we are experiencing probably the most intense international competitive environment I think we could have seen, certainly with the development of Brazil and Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Ethiopia, Russia, Ukraine. It's more intense than ever before. And then secondly, within the industry, whether it be trading companies or elevator companies or farmers, it's much more intense than we've ever experienced before. So we're in a whole new world as we go into this trade war world. So thank you. I look forward to your questions.
And Leslie.
Hi, everyone. I'm the Director for Public Policy, or the trade lobbyist at NCGA, based in Washington, D.C. And, many of you are members. We represent about 40,000 dues-paying members, corn farmers around the country, and the broader community of 300,000 corn farmers' interests in the public policy space, and really focus day in and day out on driving demand for corn and corn products. We do that here at home, but on the trade front, what we work to do is to sort of create a trade policy environment, or work toward a trade policy environment that makes your products more competitive around the world. We don't have a trade policy environment that's doing that very well right now, but I do think we've had some key wins with a lot of your help and grassroots engagement from around the country that we can build on, and hopefully moving forward we'll be moving from defense back to offense in terms of developing new markets and solidifying those relationships to help really make sure you return to that competitive advantage that American farmers have always enjoyed and that Bill referenced. So again, look forward to hearing more from you. What's on your mind?
All right, thank you so much for that opening statement. So we're going to start the TV portion of the program. Welcome to our Hot Issues International Marketing Panel, coming to you from the Northern Corn and Soybean Expo here in Fargo, North Dakota. Of course, the big question everybody has right now, and I'm going to start with you, Jim Sutter, because China-U.S. trade negotiations, will we get a deal by March 1st? And if we don't, will the deadline be extended so that we can get something worked out?
Michelle, why don't you ask me a difficult question to begin with? In all seriousness, I mean, that's the question that's on everybody's mind with regard to soybeans. You know, just to put it in context, soybeans have been a huge, 60% of our soybean crop is exported, and in the last few years, something around half of those exports, 40% to 50%, has gone to China. So people would first off say, why do you have such a heavy concentration with one market? We'd say, well, they've been buying, so who's not going to sell to them? Our acres have gone up, we've grown our crop to supply their demand. So this year, when we have the trade war going on between the U.S. and China and the loss of that market, it is obviously very, very significant, and particularly significant here in North Dakota, where I guess 85–90% of the soybeans that are produced here in North Dakota get exported. A lot of them go to the PNW, and China's been a critical market for us. So trying to figure out what we're going to do in China is critical. What I know about the negotiations is that there have been very good discussions taking place as far back as this past summer, when our U.S. Ag negotiators, so Ambassador Dowd, Undersecretary McKinney, and several others have been meeting with their counterparts in China and talking about how do we work out a deal on agricultural trade, trying to overcome many of the issues that we have, whether it's biotech approvals, other SPS issues, just other little sort of non-tariff trade barriers, trying to work those out. And I think we're making good progress on that, but it's part of this overarching deal. And it will all, I think whether or not we have a trade deal by the 1st of March, it's going to be much broader than just agriculture. Right. I think from an ag perspective, we're making good progress. It is critical to the soybean market. We've been doing all we can as an organization and as an industry to try and ship soy to other markets, and we'll certainly continue to do that. But China is the big kahuna in the world soybean market. So if the U.S. gets locked out of China, as we have been really for the last 6 months, there's both, short term, obviously you're feeling the pain, you're storing a lot of soybeans here in North Dakota, for example, but long term, we're encouraging our competition to grow more. And that's more worrying to me probably than the short term. The short term we can recover from. The long term, as Brazil grows their industry, I really worry about that from a long-term perspective.
Right, and hopefully we can talk a little bit more about that later. Dr. Wilson, we have the big issues left, the IP, the IT, so can you get a deal by March 1st, or are we looking at the next $200 billion of tariffs going into place? And if we get a deal, will it include a lot more U.S. ag purchases?
So I follow this stuff with a microscope, and I read this South China Morning Post every day. And this morning, it didn't say officially it won't be March 1st, but they're debating the next dates of meetings, which would be the end of March, either Mar-a-Lago or in China. So that tells me it's probably not going to be March 1st. I'd be curious what happens on March 1st if there's not a meeting by March 1st. Of course, nobody knows that here. But it's a pretty monumental task to sort of unravel these things like intellectual property. I'll tell you a story on that. I'm a visiting professor in Nanjing and go there frequently. And more than 10 years ago, we had a conference on technology, and the minister in charge of it was there. And somebody asked him, "Sir, when will you begin protecting intellectual property?" And I'll never forget what he said. Long Chinese answer, long English translation. You know what he said? "When it gets to be Chinese technology, we'll find a way to protect it." I find that astoundingly, evidentially true today. And I think that's really important because, to be honest, the issues of soybeans are pretty easy. Get rid of the tariffs.
That's right.
And deal with COFCO. You don't want to say that, but deal with COFCO. And probably make sure they revert to the same level of their previous purchases. If that's not part of the agreement, you got a horrible job to do, because we're going to be cast as an unreliable supplier, and we got lots of new competitors. So, these soybeans is easy, but these intellectual property and forced technology transfer, they're monumental, and it's hard-pressed to think you're going to solve those in 90 days.
No doubt. Leslie, as far as China and what corn hopes to get out of it, they've mentioned purchases of corn, of ethanol, and I know you guys are looking at biotech synchronization or asynchronization. Are those your priorities out of this trade talk?
I would say that's a pretty good summary, Michelle. I mean, I think these talks are kind of now moving down to parallel tracks, right, where you have the longer term, really structural issues, like IP and forced technology transfer that are going to be harder and take a longer time to work out. And I think what we're seeing materialize on the maybe shorter term track is identifying some of these issues. I think China's being very smart in putting together, knowing that agriculture is very politically significant here at home, addressing our issues in a more transactional or more short-term way as a show of good faith to keep the U.S. at the negotiating table. And we certainly hope that some of the issues, and I think the administration has suggested they're on the table, that we care about, like dealing with asynchronous biotech approvals. And I think you've all heard the horror stories of like 7-year delays. We've seen some new traits shake loose out of the process, including the new chrome corn trait, for example. But that doesn't mean that the actual system is going to change and be more predictable and reliable and conform to the global trading system that we've signed up for. So that's one of the things we need to see, is that longer term change, so we don't find ourselves a year from now right back where we started from. And then on the ethanol front, because that has been such a growing and growth area for us, and China's an important market. And we've been shut out of it as a result of their retaliation. China also wants to, go to E10 by 2020. And we're hoping that U.S. corn-based ethanol is going to help them get there, but we need to resolve some of these issues, and we need that true market access, not just a one-time transaction. Doesn't mean we won't take the one-time transaction, but we are going to need a longer-term market access as well.
So Jim, exports projected by USDA in the WASDE report on Friday at like 1.875 billion bushels. So how close do you think we'll get to that, and what markets are making up the downfall with China out of the market, at least, partially out?
So it looks like we have China back to, they'll be a participant at least. Early on, we were worried that they wouldn't take anything. Now they've made these 2 5 million ton purchases for a total of about 10 million tons. Places where we have seen, markets come back or U.S. market share grow, particularly in Europe, particularly in Japan, so old stalwart markets. In Europe, for example, the second largest importer, if you take them collectively, after China, we've seen our market share grow from something under 40% to almost 80% so far this marketing year. So really good to see that. Now, it's been also driven partially by prices, so they'll help make that up. We've seen great growth in places like Egypt. That was our #1 growing market for U.S. soy exports, a place where poultry consumption, poultry production, aquaculture production are both growing rapidly. We've had active programs there, and we can't take all the credit for it, but I think their preference for buying mainly U.S. soy is because of our long-term work that we've done there. You go to Pakistan, you go to Bangladesh, some of those markets. So you see, it's a wide variety of markets. I can't overlook the Americas. Mexico continues to be an important market for U.S. soy. So all of those put together, as long as we can keep U.S. soy competitive versus Brazil, I think we can come close to those USDA numbers.
So any markets in particular that are going to be, that you're developing in Southeast Asia for that PNW market to make up the downfall from China?
Well, we're continuing to work hard in all of the Southeast Asian countries. A notable, just recently, Taiwan purchased soybeans off of the PNW, the first time in 13 years that they had taken shipments off of the PNW. So that was a good thing. But we continue to talk about the PNW soybeans with all of those markets. Even getting, I mentioned Bangladesh and Pakistan earlier. Those have been rapidly growing markets for U.S. soy, and they've taken some shipments off the PNW. So you might think it's not really the right direction, but if you get things priced right, that can be a good outlet for those soybeans.
Dr. Wilson, what impact is the African swine fever having on the overall need or demand from China for our soybean product?
Yeah, so it's a very hot issue, and the slide that Jim had up here a few moments ago showed China going up to about 100 million metric tons, and prior to the trade war and the swine flu, it had a projected continued growth rate like that through the next 10 years. And you'll see that it stalled out the last couple of years, in part because of the trade war, but the swine fever thing is a big deal, and now going from 100 million tons of imports to maybe like 85 or 84, that's a significant reduction in just import demand caused by the disease you're speaking to.
Mm-hmm. Do you think as well that have we lost that market for good? I mean, we built China as a long-term reputation market these guys went in for 35 years and worked to develop that market. Have we ruined our long-term relationship with them?
How do you like that one?
Well, I have an opinion, but I'm really anxious to hear what you have to say.
Here's my concern. We've had about 4 major trade disruptions in my career. So that was the Russian grain embargo. Instead of exporting to Russia, we're competing with Russia today. We've had something in poultry. We had Mir 162, where at that time, China was projected to grow to 25 million metric tons. They went back to 2 or 3. And even today, though we're $8 a ton cheaper landed in China versus Ukraine, we're not selling nothing. So they have the ability to retaliate against unreliable supplier. And I've told the North Dakota Soybean Group, and I'm sure you're aware of this, that the #1 priority is try to figure out how to convince China that we're reliable. And I don't know exactly how to do that, but you got to have a good smile on your face.
We need a good smile on our face.
It's a big challenge.
It is.
It's the #1 priority, because if we don't return to China, you're going to be selling like crazy in Europe and all this, and you're still going to be storing soybeans.
Exactly. We still won't have the size. If I can just comment, one thing we have done in terms of our marketing programs in China, we have not stopped doing what we have been doing for the last years. We have continued on with our programs, even though we're not shipping anything there today, with the exact purpose of what you're talking about, maintaining that relationship, wanting to be there when the trade does open up again. And, you know, and I have been there twice in the last 3 months, meeting with senior peoples in the various senior representatives of the various import companies. And we talk about the fact that it's not their company or not the U.S. that, you know, U.S. soybean growers that are having this trouble. It's a much higher level issue. So we're trying to keep that relationship strong at the commercial level. It's an issue.
We could spend all 45 minutes talking about China, obviously, with the trade war, but I also want to talk about the USMCA. Leslie, do you think that Congress will ratify that deal, especially now with the House Democrats in control? And how much different is USMCA versus NAFTA?
Well, I sure hope so, Michelle. That's a top priority to the National Corn Growers Association, because for us, you know, Mexico is that sort of irreplaceable market. That's where 1/4 of our corn exports go. Canada is a big buyer of ethanol. And, you know, our partners at the U.S. Grains Council and corn farmers across the country have worked long and hard to develop those relationships. And I think that there's a lot, you know, broader economic significance to the economic partnership, really, that we've built with Mexico and Canada over the time that NAFTA's been in place. It would be very difficult to unwind. There would be, I would imagine, a lot of farms that go out of business, quite frankly, if that were to happen. We can't afford to lose this market, so we need Congress to ratify the USMCA. It's going to take all of us to really push, because trade agreements, no matter who's in power, are always close. One bright spot on this, because I choose to be optimistic, and some of the conversations that we've been having with new members of Congress, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, are that they do understand that it would probably be an economic disaster if we didn't have an agreement in place. And this is a little bit of unfamiliar territory, where we have an old agreement that's being replaced with a new agreement, and the politics around that are, you know, uncertain. But public opinion polling in support of trade and NAFTA in particular has really gone up. And I think that's sort of a don't know what you got till it's gone situation, where the threat of losing something like this, you know, we sold $3.2 billion worth of corn and corn products to Mexico and Canada last year. That's a big deal. Losing something like that will have a real economic ripple effect, and I think folks are going to take the decision, members of Congress are going to take this decision of what position to take very seriously. A farmer that I work with regularly on trade policy issues said to me, well, how do you improve upon an A++ agreement like we have with NAFTA? But I think our trade negotiators have done that, particularly in agriculture. Areas like sanitary and phytosanitary standards, really elevating a high standard SPS chapter that is enforceable, and making sure that our partners, Mexico and Canada, are committed to that. Not only is that important for the way that we trade with Mexico and Canada, and I'm talking about how we harmonize our standards for addressing animal and plant health risk, which, if we don't have an agreement about how we approach those issues, can cause major trade disruptions from country to country. We don't have a ton of challenges there with Mexico and Canada in the corn space compared to some of our other trading partners. But the beauty of what was achieved in this area and in the biotech area of the USMCA, the beauty of what was achieved is that that sets a standard for us to use in future free trade agreements where some of those issues can cause major trade disruptions. So we can point to those as modernization achievements, but I think the most important thing is that this keeps our most important, in the corn world, our most important trading relationships intact, and we need every market that we can have access to right now to get your prices up.
Just a quick follow-up on the USMCA, Mexico in particular being a top corn customer. When I was there in March, because we were renegotiating NAFTA, they were looking at Brazil. And, you know, we talked about being a reliable supplier, and so they were looking at that market. Now that we have USMCA, are they back solely with the U.S.?
I mean, we have a 96% market share. Certainly Brazil is really trying to eat into that space, and they've been courting Mexico pretty seriously since the uncertainty around NAFTA went into place. And listen, Mexico is doing what I think any country would do if they're questioning the reliability of their supplier, which is trying to develop a plan B. Their livestock industry demands that. And so I think that we're, working certainly very hard. The Grains Council is working very hard. Our officers from NCGA and the Grains Council were over in Mexico meeting with government officials from the incoming administration, end of October. They were meeting with, I'm trying to think of that timeline, maybe end of the year, end of 2018, meeting with government officials from the new administration, but also with top customers to say, we're your friends, we've been your friends, we want to keep being your friends and working together. And those relationships, I think, are standing the test of time. One other thing I'll mention about, just to revisit ratification for a second, there are what's called 232 tariffs, steel and aluminum tariffs in place on Mexico and Canada right now. That is one thing that we are going to have to overcome if we want to see this agreement passed. We are hearing that not only from Mexico and Canada, hearing it from a lot of members of Congress. There is retaliation, not on corn at this point, that could change, but there's retaliation on apples, on pork, on dairy. That could really threaten the benefits of having this new agreement. So I want to make sure that folks in the audience are aware of that. That's probably a precondition for this agreement to pass.
Thanks so much for joining us for our Hot Issues International Marketing panel here from the Northern Corn and Soybean Expo in Fargo. Okay, that was our TV part that we had to get in, so we'll start back up here. Welcome back to the Northern Corn and Soybean Expo and our International Marketing panel. And let's talk a little bit about the global recession and the emerging markets that we are seeing as a result now of the trade war. Where are we looking next? And who would like to start with that? Maybe Dr. Wilson, you want to start on the global recession?
Go ahead.
Are there certain countries that we're worried about with that? Yeah, everybody's passing the hot potato here.
Well, I'd like to talk about sort of the countries we are looking at from a long-term perspective. And while there is this global recession going on, or maybe a global slowdown, I guess I look at it a little differently. As I travel around and see various countries, I see pretty robust economic activity in many places around the world. And I think we're fortunate. We're not selling a luxury item. We're generally selling a food product. And we're selling soy, corn. The things we're talking about here are what goes into basic foodstuffs. So as I go to a place like Pakistan or Bangladesh or India, and I see people wanting to improve their diets, I see people wanting to have meat in countries where, we've said for years, well, there are lots of vegetarians there. They're not going to be meat eaters. And come to find out, a lot of them are economic vegetarians because they haven't had the ability to buy meat. So I guess my point is that I think the economy is not, while it's not as strong as we'd like it to see on a global basis, I think there's a lot of good things happening. And so we are focusing for a long-term effort on some of these places where we do see this economic activity. We see large populations, we see low protein consumption today, and we think a desire to increase that. And that's really the long-term work that our organization is doing, trying to develop these long-term markets for U.S. soy and even U.S. ag products, I think more broadly, because these people, as we get them to consume more, as we get them to consume more protein, they're going to be the customers. And it may not be for the people sitting at the table today. It might be for some of your kids who are going to be the next generation farming, because it might take 10 years before these countries really become significant importers. But that's the way we've started with all of these markets. You know, that's the way we started with China. 12 years before they imported the first ton of soy, work had been done there. So we're working in these markets trying to get started. And that's a key part of our emphasis these days. It was a shift we made last year, working with the National Checkoff and with Foreign Ag Service, trying to kind of shift our strategy a little bit, trying to really focus on building these long-term markets.
What about corn, ethanol, and DDGs? Emerging markets there, Leslie.
So we look a lot at population and middle class growth as a key indicator of where future markets are. Again, a lot of it has to do with consuming protein, and we hope that those animals are eating U.S. corn in some form or fashion. Or looking at what countries are reviewing their energy policies and want to incorporate renewable fuels that could help them reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and sharing the success stories of what U.S. ethanol has, or what ethanol has meant in the U.S. And so key partners. I mean, certainly Asia's really important as a region. We see a lot of potential in Vietnam and the Philippines. And then, there are some barriers to overcome, but certainly Indonesia and India are very attractive future markets. And the Grains Council's done a lot of work in Latin America as well, in countries that are not Argentina or Brazil, with the exception of, actually, Brazil's our top export market for ethanol, but, Peru, Colombia, for example. And then I think longer term down the road, we see some opportunities in sub-Saharan Africa and emerging markets there as people increase their purchasing power, they diversify their diets, as Jim said. And so the Grains Council is doing some work there in those early emerging markets.
So I'll just respond to that because you asked me to. So one of the things that we're pretty blessed with in all of these industries is demand growth is pretty robust. And I recall a few years ago we did a study for a major logistics company. And, we were projecting consumption growth rates at about 3 or 4% a year, which is probably what you're looking at, which is pretty robust relative to the aggregate economy. And when we started looking across countries, what we found was it's not only income and moving from low income to middle income, but it's also urbanization and women in the workforce. And this is a global trend. This is happening in this country, it's happening in many Latin American countries, it's happening in China. And you get females in the workforce, you get urbanization, and there's a demand for convenience and higher quality foods. And that's typically irreversible, so if you have a recession, it doesn't reverse itself. So we're pretty blessed by that, and that's good for all of these industries.
We're getting quite a few questions. I'm going to kind of lump them together here, if I can, talking about how to improve exports to India and per capita consumption-wise. What are the opportunities there?
Well, I would say in the short run, I think India has to grow their consumption to the point where they don't have enough, where they realize they have a shortage. Because today, India produces, I'm talking about soy, India produces some soy, and they export a tiny bit of what they produce. So they haven't really got a shortage in their country yet. I would argue that they're about there because their price of soybean meal is about 25 to 50% above the world market price. So clearly, that's happening for a reason. They're not competitive to export. Their market's making sure it's not. But I think they have to grow their demand just a little bit more, and then they will remove some of the barriers that are in place today to import. There are lots of non-tariff trade barriers and biotech issues that are going to make it difficult today to ship into India. I think if we get a little further down and let them grow their demand to where they need it, then they will help remove those barriers to trade and make it possible to import. They import a lot of things today. They're a huge importer of veg oil. They don't have any barrier on that because they need it. We need to get to that same point with soybeans or soy protein, soybean meal, that they'll remove those barriers. So I think that's what's going to take place. I think it's probably a 3 to 5 year time frame we're looking at. I may be sorry I said only 5 years, it might be 10, but I think it's going to take a little more time. But I think they have the potential of becoming a big market with all of those people, young age, robust population, or a robust economic growth in some sectors.
Are they concerned about biotechnology? Is that going to be a barrier?
It's an important barrier today.
It depends on whose technology.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I think it will be less of a barrier when they, again, I think when they recognize or when they have a need for what they want to import, the problem of biotechnology restrictions will go away. They'll find a way to approve biotech traits, bring them in, use them in their feedstuffs.
Develop their own.
Or develop their own, But I think, yes. So I think it'll go away when they have a need for it.
I'll just say, India is on everybody's target with the population, the demographics of the population, income growth, everything. The problem is there's so many government interventions that are so random over time that nobody knows how to get in.
Right. It's very complicated.
Nobody knows how to do that.
We have a couple of questions on Russia that I'm going to combine as well here. Do we need to be concerned about the 2.5 million acres that Russia, I'm thinking it should be 2.5 million metric tons that have been sold to China for soybean production, or if that is acres, apparently they sold the acres to them for production. And Dr. Wilson, do you see Russia increasing soybean production and permanently replacing some of our sales to China? And where would those production areas be?
That's one question.
It was two, I combined them together.
So it's 2.5 million hectares is
Yeah, I
what
think
it
it's
is.
supposed to be hectares.
So last July, when all of this kerfuffle came around, the Ministry of Agriculture tried to encourage the agro holdings to expand production in the Russian Far East to serve the Chinese market via the Silk Road. Right. And I don't think any of that ever came to pass, but when I read the headlines at least, it's my understanding that he's working with the Chinese National Farm Organization to be farmers in that part of the country. That's going to be a 20-year project. So it's not going to happen immediately, but it's not going to be reversible. I don't know exactly the current status of it. Will Russia expand soybean production? Everyone in the world's expanding soybean production. Russia is, Ethiopia is, Brazil is. Russia is expanding probably in around 10 or 20% a year. But remember, Russia is an importer. And traditionally, Russia's been an importer for 20 years. They can't import from us, so they have to import from Uruguay and Paraguay. And because of the war with Ukraine, they don't like importing from there. There's no doubt Russia will expand their soybean production. I would surprise me in the near future they'd become a routine exporter. And if they did, it would just be within the Black Sea region, Turkey, and those countries.
Let's also talk about some of the trade deals that we're working on, or what's next after USMCA. We've got the EU, we've got Japan, all of these bilaterals in the pipeline. Leslie, where do you see us maybe striking first or hitting a home run first?
Well, Japan is definitely our second priority. That's one we're really excited about. I say second to USMCA. We would have had an agreement with Japan if we had stayed in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That agreement moved forward without the U.S., and so we've lost a couple years to our competitors there that we've really got to make up. We've really been pushing the administration to get on an agreement with Japan ASAP. Japan, we sent about 2.4 billion bushels of corn there last year, $1 billion worth of corn there last year. It's really important to us, but the preference for U.S. corn is starting to slowly erode, and our friends, pork and beef, they have an even more dire situation there, where they have, their competitors have preferential tariff rates right now, and they're reducing over the years, so they're really losing market share and going to start losing market share more quickly. If they succeed, we succeed. So this is a must-have agreement, and then I don't have as optimistic of an outlook on the EU. Brexit's still being figured out, so we really aren't going to know what a trade agreement with the UK looks like. And we're hoping that the administration focuses on Vietnam, for example, as another opportunity. But I do caution that if additional tariffs, there's a potential for auto tariffs to go into place over the next month or two. There's a report being delivered to the president later this month from Commerce Department that will make a recommendation about whether the U.S. puts auto tariffs into place, and that could, stop our agreement with Japan before it starts. So we're hoping that doesn't come into play.
Any other comments from anybody else on the panel?
I would just say on that TPP, wheat is going to be very severely impacted, particularly from this state, because there's just an article in Global Mail last week on how good TPP is for Canada because we're not there, and particularly for spring wheat, and the tariff differential is huge, and it's a big mistake on our side and a big challenge, so I'm glad you're working on it.
Let's also talk about Brazil, because obviously they have become a bigger exporter of soybeans now than the U.S. this last year, and especially they've taken the China market. So does that continue to happen here, especially as we start going into our planting season and their harvest is coming in? I know they've had a few production problems in Brazil, but...
I guess the only, Brazil was talking about having a record crop this year, actually surpassing U.S. production. I think given the dry weather they've had there, their most recent numbers I've seen are production in Brazil to be 110, 113 million tons, down from early projections over 120. So they will continue, I think, to be very aggressive to try and expand their production areas. I understand their new administration is going to look more favorably upon that. I think their whole Minister of Agriculture, Minister of the Environment, I think will be encouraging farmers to be trying to put more land in production. So they're going to be a competitor. And that's one of the reasons we continue to talk about this, the U.S. soy advantage and the things that we have, I think, over Brazil. And then we also need to figure out how do we grow the overall pie that we are shipping into, because they're going to continue to grow, and U.S. growers also want to continue to grow more. So we need to work on how to build overall demand.
And with the amino acid profile up here in the northern Corn Belt, that is one of the things you're using to be an advantage over Brazil.
Exactly. Well, that's one of the U.S. soy advantages, the nutrient profile that's present in U.S. soy, the higher concentration of amino acids and energy.
Let me just speak to that, and I don't disagree with what you say, but I'd just like to add the following. I think about 6 years ago, we opened a new export terminal in this country, EGT in the PNW. Right, yep. First one since 1982. Since the trade war commenced, there's been 8 new port projects announced in Brazil. And their number one problem competing internationally has always been inadequate and inefficient port infrastructure. Now, I'm not saying all 8 of those are going to be built. It's easy to announce. It's another thing to make it happen. But I'm very concerned as their soybeans grow north and they start exporting off that northeastern tip in St. Louis, stuff like that, that's going to be a much harsher logistical competition. So that's one point. But what they're trying to do is reduce ship wait time. Their average 5 years ago was like 30 days at harvest time. Now it's much lesser, and before they can grow agriculture, they got to grow that infrastructure. Major concern. The second one is in the Chinese negotiations, there's something called SOEs, state-owned enterprises, one of which is COFCO, which is the dominant import agency for China. They are the dominant exporter from Brazil today, and the dominant investor in infrastructure, elevators, railroads, and others, as well as now in Argentina. And I'll be just curious whether they're going to unravel this in these negotiations. But it's a crucial issue we better pay attention to.
Yep.
On the other hand, to be fair, China's import as much as they import. If I were guiding them, I would never want to be so dependent on Brazil as they have evolved to in the past year. Is very, very, very risky to have that sort of dependence there. So they should be wanting to be diversifying. Ironically, they're diversifying to places at the moment other than here. Yeah. Yes.
We appreciate all of you being here. This has been a fantastic discussion on international trade, and we thank you for joining us for our international marketing panel here at the Northern Corn and Soybean Expo in Fargo. Let's have a round of applause for our panel.
All right, now my favorite part of the day, lunch. I've heard me speak. I'm not impressed by me anymore. I'm here for the food, but I have a couple announcements I need to make first. By a show of hand, is anyone an escalator repairman in the room? Anyone? No. Okay, so that will not get repaired. We do, some of you know, have an escalator down. Of course, it's the one that goes up. Just want you to know you can use that escalator as steps like we used to do. But there are elevators. If you'd head back towards the restrooms and kind of go around the brick area, you'll see the elevator back there. I also want to make an announcement that if you are doing the dicamba training, be sure that you stop by the registration down on the lower level and sign up for that. And that's 4:45 today, 4:45. Make sure that you do sign up for that downstairs. The next time that you'll get together after the lunch will be at 1:15 for the breakout session. We have several of those sessions. The annual meeting for the soybean growers will be back in the Bison Theater. We'll have the water and wetland session in 101. And then we'll also have the stress program. We all need that. That'll be in 104. And the insects, diseases, and soils program will be right here. Hot topic booth, don't forget to stop by that. Also, the research pavilion downstairs, you're going to see that in the exhibit area. So we will see you back here at 2:15 after you make your breakout sessions and after lunch. So have a great lunch. We'll see you later on.